Oh my God. Why do people hate that movie so much? Wow, I'm it was like so silly and weird and extravagant and cool, and I feel like there's so much to say about like abuse and intergenerational trauma and like what that love means. But oh my gosh, like it really took me sideways. Like, whoa, it's like such a cliche in some ways, but how are people watching this and being like, my heights are unweathered? Like, my heights are fully weathered.
Soundstripe.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Popcorn Therapy, where the stories we love, or in this case, maybe hate, tell us something about who we are. We're doing Wuthering Heights today, which I learned only recently is quote unquote Wuthering Heights. I didn't notice that when I first watched this film by Fennell, but I think it's important actually that it is in quotation marks. So we'll get back to that. I have been absolutely obsessing about this movie since I saw it. And I have been absolutely bursting to talk about it. I'm so excited to talk about it with Marcelle Kosman, who is here with me today. Marcelle, would you like to introduce yourself, let folks know who you are, how you're coming into this conversation?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Julie's friend, Marcelle. I was a guest on the podcast previously. We talked about heated rivalry. I am also the co-host of the podcast Material Girls, which is a pop culture podcast that uses critical theory to understand the zeitgeist. So that's that's what you're going to get from me today.
Yeah, and I watched this movie, I think, because I listened to the Material Girls episode about it. I initially had heard a lot of the criticism, I guess, a lot of people saying it was boring or bad, or that they just didn't like it, or, you know, they had these more serious criticisms about it. And I didn't have any intention of watching it, but the way that you guys were talking about the visuals, I think, was what kind of pulled me in initially. And I thought, you know, it's Mother's Day, the children are taken care of. Why don't I just like take in this silly movie, you know? And I ended up absolutely sobbing.
Yeah.
And left Marcelle a voice note about how truly my heights were weathered after this film. I really loved it. Like, I just absolutely loved it. And it gave me so much to think about and feel about. And so why don't we talk about how we came to this? Like, tell me about your relationship with this movie and your relationship with the book, because of course they are connected.
Yeah. I went to see the movie by myself because Material Girls had a podcast episode scheduled to talk about it, and I had forgotten that I was the person who was supposed to be leading that episode. And so I was gently reminded by my producer that it was my episode to script. So I had to see the movie immediately so that I could whip something together. And so I had, you know, heard some big feelings in the social media sphere about the movie. I think I had planned to see it, but it didn't feel urgent because I didn't particularly care for the book. And so I wasn't particularly excited to see the adaptation, or I also wasn't excited to like hate watch the adaptation, as I think a lot of people who love the book maybe have, like, that might be why so many of them have gone to see the movie. And so I really went into the movie kind of only knowing that people were upset about it, and that they were upset about it long before it hit theaters. And I was also sitting a little bit too close. I was sitting, I would say, one row closer than I would normally be comfortable with. And that experience of being like so close to this incredibly visually rich and stimulating film, I felt just so completely overwhelmed by the whole thing. And at a certain point, I can't remember what scene it was specifically. I think it was maybe one of the foggy scenes on the moors where I had this realization like, oh, I'm watching a director's work of art. That's what I'm watching right now. It's not a romance. I mean, it is, but it's not like a romance genre. It's like an auteur kind of film. Emerald Fennell has put so much of herself into this movie. Like, this isn't a generic movie. This is Emerald Fennell's work of art. And so that experience really shaped my feelings about it. And in the end, I also, like, I left feeling a little bit shell-shocked, like a little bit like, I just experienced so much.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I think I really loved it. I think I really loved that movie. So I was thrilled to hear that you also like were wuthered, that your heights were also wuthered by this film. Yeah.
Yeah, and in so many ways, right? That overwhelm for me had so many layers to it. And when I went into it, I will say I had absolutely, well, not no relationship to the book. Like, I knew it existed. I knew that Bella reads it in Twilight.
She sure
Which
does.
makes sense, right? But I hadn't ever read the book at all. I don't think, like, even when it was sort of in high school, I feel like I read Gone with the Wind or something else instead, like during that era. And so I had no attachment to it, no expectations of it. I didn't really know like what it was. I didn't have a sense of like, oh, this is a book about X, right? I didn't even have that. And so just from the storytelling of the film itself, I loved it. I don't feel like I needed to have read the book to understand it. I don't feel like I missed any plot points. I wasn't confused by, I mean, I was left with questions, especially about Nellie. Like I was thinking about Nellie a lot afterwards, which I thought was interesting. But I did get the sense that a lot of people who were upset about it were coming from a place of like, I know and love this book and I have a sense of what to expect from this. And that's what I feel upset about. So for me, it just wasn't ruined by any of that. And I think my expectations were also so low because I had heard that it was, bad and boring and silly and all these things. It absolutely took me by surprise that I was so moved by it by the end. Because I think, through the first 3/4 of it, I thought it was weird. I thought it was silly. I thought it was often funny and like super gross in a way that I loved. I have a bit of a special place in my heart for pieces of art that make you feel uncomfortable and pull you in and make you complicit as the reader or the viewer. And that happens in the very first scene.
Definitely.
So for me, that very first scene, which for those that don't remember or who have no intention of watching this film, I mean, it's not a spoiler, it's literally the first scene. Well, I guess it is in a sense because I think what happens is that you're watching the credits come up. It's like a black scene and it's sort of like this film is by blah, blah, blah. And you hear the sound of like a tightened breath and like leather. And immediately your mind goes to sex, right? Like your mind is going to sex, arousal, pleasure. And then the lights go on, as it were, and you see that it's actually someone hanging, and the sound is them like they're dying, right? So that's shocking already, and you're like, oh my God, that's not what I thought it was. And for me, I feel like this emotional moment of like expecting one thing and getting another it sets the tone for so much of the film. I think it's so important in terms of like, I felt like the film was already pointing at me. Like the second it started, it was like, look, you're emotionally involved now. Like you've already done a thing that like you might feel a bit of shame coming up, right? Or like discomfort or something because, if you had that moment of like arousal or excitement or titillation and then, oh God, it's like this horrible, torture, death thing. And then immediately after that, you see kind of the townspeople. Kathy is there as a child. You know, the young boys are pointing out that the person who's hanging has an erection. Then people start having sex in the like town square. It's like, wow, okay, there's a lot happening here.
Yeah.
And for me, that scene also set the tone in terms of like, this is an era of violence, right? It's an era of abuse. It's an era where historically, you know, this was a culture where people would have been seeing death on display, not only death, but also like torture and cruelty, you know, on display just all the time, like death everywhere. And it made me think also of a theory that comes from Resmaa Menakem's My Grandmother's Hands. I don't know if you know that one.
I don't know it.
It's a really, really interesting and very effective book about how race lives inside of our bodies. White bodies, racialized bodies, and police bodies is kind of what he talks about. Black bodies, I guess, is what he's focusing on more so. But what he describes, I thought was really interesting as someone who's white with white heritage, right? Is that people who came from, white Europe often left those places to discover or colonize the New World because they were in a time of poverty, plague, death, and this like constant vicarious trauma, right? Like there's just trauma around you all the time. You don't leave your homeland for fun. Usually, actually, like you don't leave because you're like, oh, it'll be fun to discover the new world. Like that might be the narrative, but it actually comes from this place of, this is torture, this is hell, like we have to leave, right? So the way Menakem tells that story is that people came with unprocessed trauma, which is highly contagious, and then the colonizers basically inflicted that trauma on the people that they colonized, right? And so if we think about it that way, white people coming to settled lands like Canada and America are here with this trauma inside of their bodies from such a long time ago that's totally unprocessed. And then it's inflicted in all of these different ways that we're still living with today, right? And that kind of impacts how our bodies experience the world. Anyway, that was quite a long little tangent there, but it did make me think, like it primed me to think about intergenerational trauma and abuse, which I feel like you see in this family in so many other ways as well. But I think that setting the tone there was really important for me.
I mean, yeah, that scene for sure, it caught me so off guard. And I'm positive I had the exact same experience that you were describing, Julie, because I 100% was thinking like sex, BDSM, some kind of like illicit pleasure, something. And then, oh no, it's state sanctioned murder.
This is not what I thought.
Oh no, he has an erection. Oh no, I don't know what I'm supposed to be. So there was so much there to process.
Yeah.
That I didn't know what to do with it. And then like you said, that's what sets the tone for the entire film. And
not to mention that it was marketed as a bodice ripper romance. And I think it opened on Valentine's Day, right? So I think you're also primed to expect that this is what you're going to watch, right? Yeah.
I forgot oh my God, it's
so I feel like it has that double sucker punch of like, oh, you thought you were coming here to watch like a dumb, sexy romance. Like, guess what? You're in for a horror film, actually, which I think this was. I think it was a horror romance, which is
definitely
a whole genre that I feel like to the why this, why now question, maybe we'll come back to that. But romance as horror. Like, I think that's actually what this film was, which I thought was so interesting.
Totally.
But please, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely, I think because of all of the noise about its public reception, I genuinely forgot that it was totally marketed as like a very sexy, sultry romance, and it was like, you know, like the greatest love story ever told, which, having read the book, I was like, that one? Okay. I don't know about that, but all right. So,
was that in quotation marks?
The greatest love story ever told?
In the marketing? Because that was a part of the marketing, right?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, because I think that if we remember again Bella reading Wuthering Heights in Twilight, that points to such a problematic perception of what great love is and means, right? Because this, in the film, I thought, and even more so now that I know more about the book, like, this is not an ideal love romance story, especially from that teenage place of like, the Twilight sort of perspective of like, oh, someone who can overpower me or whatever it is, like that speaks to, oh my gosh, all these layers of like power dynamics, hierarchy, where you are in society, what sex and love and attachment can mean for you, and in a society that is so messed up, which again, that opening scene speaks to, that's still true about us today, right?
Oh yeah.
We are witnessing trauma and violence on a level that in many ways we haven't before, because we have access to social media and like visual news coverage from all over the world and so on. Like, we witness this stuff, and then we're supposed to go and have our like happy little romances or whatever it is. It's like, it's going to impact our attachments when we have those experiences, right? So I feel like that idea of like quote unquote greatest love story ever told, like, was that tongue in cheek? Because nobody should read this as great love, really. It's complicated, obsessed, like there's interesting things about it, but this isn't what we should be aiming for our love to feel like, right?
No, I completely agree. I know Emerald Fennell talks about how she, with this adaptation, she wanted to recreate the experience she had reading Wuthering Heights as a teenager, and how for her it was this intense and passionate romance. And I think, you know, when I think back to how intensely I felt in my high school relationships, that makes sense. Like, we are not fully developed people. Our emotions are they peak and they plummet. We are not rational. We don't behave in ways that are like respectful or healthy. It's just a lot of intense feelings. I mean, if you think about the way that you felt about music when you were a teenager, like, I would sometimes cry because of how profoundly I felt about, God help me, a Dave Matthews Band song. And like, the idea of that as a 42-year-old woman is so embarrassing. But like, if that's how I felt about music, of course that's how I felt about teenage romance, you know? And so so on the one hand, I completely understand like an emotional fixation on an object that was so profoundly meaningful to you when you were young, and that as an adult, when you go back to it, it means in completely different ways. Yeah. And so for Emerald Fennell as a filmmaker, she's deliberately trying to recreate an experience that she had as a teenager. And so what we get is a film that is intensely about passion and longing and anger and hatred and disgust and embarrassment and desire. It's not a film and shame. It's not a film about healthy relationships. Right. So in terms of the greatest love story ever told, in quotation marks, like, of course Bella would be reading it in Twilight, because her relationship with Edward is also, having not read the books and having only seen the movies, so unbelievably unhealthy. Yeah, absolutely. A terrible legacy. Like, Heathcliff as a romantic hero is a terrible legacy. And he's obviously not the origin. He's like a Byronic hero in that he's like the tortured soul who takes out his suffering on the women around him. You know, like, he didn't, Emily Bronte didn't invent that archetype, but she might have epitomized it. You know?
Yeah. Can you say more about what that means, Byronic hero?
So, so Byronic hero is a literary term. It comes, so Lord Byron was friends with Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley of Frankenstein. And he was he was a poet, and he was a known rake and a known tyrant. He was just like not a particularly good person. And so I think I hope you don't have any literature scholars listening right now, because they're gonna hate what I have to say. It's like the way that the Byronic hero like means in popular culture is this tortured artist type.
Okay. Yeah.
Who is like abusive and emotionally unstable and like disrespectful, but also like deeply appealing. I've heard people describe the Phantom as in Phantom of the Opera as a Byronic hero, for example. So yeah, it's a heroic archetype, not a healthy one.
Right. Yeah, so I've heard different things about how to understand Heathcliff in the book. And one thing I find really important about the book is that it has this unique nested storytelling kind of narrative, right? So we're hearing the story through Lockwood, who Lockwood is like way after the fact meeting Nellie.
This was one of the things that I didn't like about the book. I was like, what?
Like, who is this guy?
Like, this guy is telling me the story that he heard from Nellie, and Nellie's retelling it as, you know. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, but that seems to be part of the reason why this movie has been adapted like every couple of years since. Yeah. Even before 1939, there was like a silent film of Wuthering Heights, and then 1939 was Laurence Olivier, and then like there was one in 2023, I think, 2011, like there's just so many of them. And I mean, I haven't seen honestly any of them, so I don't know how different they are, if there are like lots of different ways of looking at it, but I think it is key to this book that Nellie is understood to be an unreliable narrator, and you're hearing her story through a whole other dude who wasn't there. And so there's a lot of room to be like, what is the real story, like underneath this story, right? So I've heard of Heathcliff in these different ways, like that he's like this horrible abuser villain, that he's a Byronic hero, that he's a victim. I also heard some really interesting stuff about how Heathcliff could represent the Moors themselves, like the capricious kind of nature. And there's this theme in the book and the movie too about like the attempts to control what's natural. So apparently the set designer was really explicitly trying to make Wuthering Heights a place where nature would encroach into the living spaces, and Thrushcross Grange, which I find very difficult to say, was a place where it was all about controlling nature, right? And so Heathcliff is like the Moors themselves. Like you don't know if it's going to be sort of like beautiful and sweet and calm, or if it's going to be this like kind of dangerous, tumultuous, stormy kind of energy. And I've also heard a theory that Heathcliff is Emily Bronte, like this wild sort of like because she was sort of this reclusive writer, I guess. And there's lots to say, I guess, about the Bronte family, but they lived in this very isolated place. And I thought the isolation in the film was very much an aspect of it. And, you know, to speak to the greatest love story ever told, or the attachment piece, which I'm trying to fold all my tangents in together here, so you can tell me later how I'm doing. But that, you know, what's interesting about the love piece is like in a world of abuse and isolation and vicarious trauma and a lack of love, really, like with all of these power dynamics and so on, Heathcliff and Kathy were each other's only person, right? And like that's why the attachment was so intense and in many ways so unhealthy, because there was nowhere else for that attachment to go. And I feel like you see that and you feel that in the film in a lot of different kinds of ways. But yeah, I loved this theory that Heathcliff was actually Emily writing herself as like this weird kind of outcast, like people don't get her. And the book was really had mixed reviews in the beginning and was criticized for being like uncouth and, you know, too sexy, even though it was all like this frustrated desire stuff, and some similar criticisms to what Emerald Fennell's movie is getting, which I think is kind of an interesting irony.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, so all of the reading that I've done about adaptation comes from Linda Hutchin, who is she probably surely retired now from University of Toronto. And she wrote a book called The Theory of Adaptation, and she talks about a number of things that I think are sort of relevant here. And the first one, right away, you had talked about how when you saw the movie, you were able to understand everything. You didn't feel like you were missing anything. You did have questions, but it wasn't like there were things missing from it for you because you hadn't read the book. And Hutchin would say that is precisely what an adaptation is supposed to do. An adaptation has an origin, possibly more than one. And in developing an adaptation, it has to be something that can stand on its own and exist independent of its source material or source materials. And she's also, one of the reasons why I really like Hutchin is because she doesn't see adaptations as inherently derivative of their source texts. She sees them as creative works in and of themselves. Like, they are inspired by this thing. They may be faithful or they may be completely irreverent. They can have a lot of different relationships to their source materials. And Emerald Fennell puts Wuthering Heights in quotation marks. And she talks about how, we used to do that with film adaptations. We used to do that all the time. The film adaptation was just in quotation marks, but we've really gotten away from that. And as a result, I think Marcelle thinks that we've gotten culturally in the habit of thinking of film adaptations of novels, especially like classic works of literature. I think we tend to think that film adaptations owe something to those source texts because those source texts are so culturally significant and important. And so it is somehow incumbent on the filmmaker to recreate the world of the novel in the film, which is impossible in so many ways because, obviously they're two completely different forms, but also because translating something from written text into film, page for page, moment for moment, you can't tell the same story in these two different variations. And so there is a kind of translation that needs to happen. People who make adaptations have to make choices all the time about what am I going to represent? And I think one of the things that I came out of the film with in watching it was, I had no trouble understanding all of the different characters and their relationships to one another. Why did I find that so confusing in the book? That's so bizarre. And then when I went back and started looking through summaries of the novel, I was like, because there are 3 generations and they're all named Heathcliff and they're all named Catherine.
Right. And
so Emerald Fennell just
it's an epic
exactly.
novel. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she was like, no. We've got a dad. We've got a maid. We've got Heathcliff. We've got Cathy. And then we've got Thrushcross Grange. That's it. That's what we're working with here. And I don't know, for me, I think that even whittling down the cast of characters to a few core people, Fennell is still able to recreate that experience of chaos and family trauma and isolation and desire for escape, desire for wealth, without having to have several generations of people hurting each other.
Yeah. I personally thought that the fantasy elements, the over the top visuals, the sort of weird, wild, impossible stuff, I feel like it also set a tone for me to not that it wasn't to take it seriously, but to see it as I'm in a bit of a fever dream here. Like I'm in a bit of a, like I'm not supposed to see this as realistic. Like I think that's kind of what a lot of those elements were trying to express. Like look at this symbolically, look at it sort of metaphorically, but don't try to see this as like a realistic, you know, expression of anything in particular.
Yeah, it's not a documentary.
No, it's not a documentary. And I think, you know, I've just started reading the book, so I don't have like the whole thing behind me, but my understanding from what I've read about it is it has like, it's very plain spoken, right? And it's very harsh. My mother-in-law is a bit of a Bronte scholar. She loves Bronte. She knows all about them. And the family and the history and all this stuff. And one of the things that we were talking about is that this book was actually intended to be anti-romantic in the sense that Emily Bronte was trying to express, like, guys, you can't just marry whoever you want. Like, this is not the society that we live in. Like, she was kind of trying to show the consequences of the romantic ideal of, you know, you can do anything, be anything. And I'm not, you know, as versed in, like, what those terms mean from her perspective. But I think part of the point of that book from her perspective was a little bit of like, guys, get it together. Like look at the consequences of these actions. And so of course that's very different from an adaptation perspective, but I did like that. I felt like it was just the whole thing had its tongue in its cheek the whole time. Like I just didn't think that I was ever supposed to see it as like literal. I mean, there was that moment when Isabella, who I loved. I think she was maybe my favorite part of this. She stole every scene she was in. And, you know, when she was doing her puppy play thing, which there's more to say about that, but I was like, oh, everyone in this movie is kinky. Like everyone's kinky and everyone has the same kink. Like this is not real. This is not meant to be realistic, right? Like this is a world where we're folding our social and physical frustrations and anxieties into sexuality in a way where we're pulling together, just like that very first scene did. Death, sex, anxiety, frustration, attachment, abuse, need, consent, pleasure, like everything's mashed together in these sex scenes. And I just thought that was very funny.
Yeah, I think you're so right.
So, can we talk about a few of those fantasy elements for a second? I had some favorites.
Yeah.
I think my favorite was the pink room that was designed to exactly match Kathy's very white skin color. And, you know, including her little freckle. And the moments where that wall, like the one wall in particular, became a bit of a character, like there were moments where she leaned up against it. You could see it sweating. Like when she had the leeches on her, the leeches were also sucking from the wall.
That's right.
Like there was something about the wall that felt very like, you're inside, but you're outside. Like it was very Woman in the Yellow Wallpaper. Like,
absolutely.
I feel like it was kind of trying to be a reference to like the like something living in the walls trying to get out, alongside with the explicit dollhouse metaphor in Thrushcross Grange, where Isabella was making the dolls and bringing her into the dollhouse. And, you know, you were in my room of ribbons, which has a little kink, you know, theme to it now in retrospect. But, you know, there's now you're kind of inside of the dollhouse. We're placing you here. And just how creepy and weird that was, and how much it was kind of like, you know, we've created this room to match exactly our perception of you, and how we want you to look, I guess, as opposed to you being the natural person that you are. Like, I just thought there was so much to that super weird wall that I just loved. And you and I have talked a little bit about how this pokes over at the sort of theory of the abject a little bit. So I would love to hear you talk about that a bit too.
Yeah, I would. I'm very excited to talk about this. So I want to start by saying that my understanding of the abject, it comes from one major, an important but only one major text by Elizabeth Gross. She talks about the abject and the signification of the body. But basically, for folks who are unfamiliar with the concept of the abject, what abjection means is that we have the surface of our body's surface, right? And the surface of our body is, we can think of it as a kind of notional border. So the barrier of our skin itself like represents the separation of our subjectivity, ourselves, what is us, from the objects in the real world. So I think it's not unrelated to like the Cartesian dualism of like mind body, like the mind has supremacy over the body kind of. But so like I am a subject, I have ideas and thoughts and feelings, and everything outside of me is an object. So this table, this chair, this microphone, this computer, these are all objects. Cultures all over the world, but also very specifically, Western culture really ritualizes the separation of the body to the outside world by policing the body's perimeter with like signs and rituals. So as a result of this cultural ritual policing of our body's borders, we are socialized to see acts and materials that cross or question the body's perimeter as abject. And when we view them as abject, we view them with disgust. And so that's one of the reasons why things like sex, poop, urine, vomit, like all of these things, it's not, they're gross and icky, but they're also like culturally, symbolically gross and icky. We don't feel comfortable talking about them. They're shameful, etc. But one of the things that Elizabeth Gross, by the way, it's Grosz, but her name is Gross.
One appropriate name for a study of the abject, for sure.
Exactly. One of the things that she brings to the conversation about abjection, she talks about how if abjection guards the borders of the subject and society, abject materials and acts can be used to affirm our corporeality outside of the social symbolic systems that control our sense of self as a subject. So what this means in terms of the movie Wuthering Heights, we have the Lintons, which is, like you were saying earlier, it's such a controlled space. It's so, like, we see it when Kathy is spying on them, and when Kathy is spying on Isabella and Edgar, everything is so maintained and deliberate and precise and manicured and organized, but controlled is really it's so unnatural, not in a sort of supernatural, uncanny way, but in a very rigid sort of a rigid, civilized kind of way. And so for Kathy, the experience of actual like sexual pleasure with Heathcliff as kind of releasing her from this sort of controlled society. With Isabella, we 100% see that. So the way that kink like plays with these notions of the body as rigidly separate from the non-human objects in the world. So like puppy play, for example, like she is performing in this way. She's releasing herself from these rigid social rules that would say you are different from animals. There's no pleasure to be found in that kind of sexual behavior. So the fact that even the idea that Isabella, who comes from this opulent, wealthy, controlled and rigid space, could be happy in Wuthering Heights, which is crumbling and dirty and so unkept with no one to manage it. We can take that as a way of thinking about like how has her exposure to the abject like released her from this socio-symbolic order that sees all of those things as bad and wrong, and has instead allowed her to like, I don't know, become more of herself, or become herself in a way that is unrestricted or uncontrolled.
Oh my God, I love that. I listened to the Material Girls episode on the Abject, which I loved, on Goblin Mode.
Yes, Goblin Mode, that's right.
And I loved this concept of the Abject as disabusing us of the notion that we are separate from each other and from the world around us. Like, from sort of an ecosystem perspective as well. There's something around, like, you are not this, you know, individual being in a vacuum that's able to have control over your environment. Like, Abject is uncomfortable partly because it reminds us of everything that we can't control, right? That we don't have power over. And I think that if we, again, go back to, like, the idea of the Wuthering Heights, the book, the movie, whatever, like the story, as being in part about what we can't control and how we are sort of stuck inside of these social structures, that the Abject is a place where, there is a freedom from that, right? I think from an attachment perspective, like from a love perspective, we do see these moments where Heathcliff loves Catherine. I think Catherine loves Heathcliff too from this same perspective, but like, I will see you at your absolute worst and most disgusting and most like literally holding your corpse, you know.
I will dig up your body and hold you. Like, that's how much he loves her.
And it like, I mean, from what I had heard, I was worried worse things were going to happen in that last scene than him just holding her body and crying. Worse things happened in Nosferatu, I guess, that I was thinking of. But yeah, in the book, he digs up her grave apparently more than once so that he can touch her body, which is like wild, right? But yeah, one of the reasons that I married my husband was because I got sick in front of him in Mexico and he didn't judge me. Sorry, my baby's whining. I can't mute him selectively. But yeah, he, you know, like, I was able to get sick with him and not be rejected, right? And I was like, oh, maybe this person really loves me. Like, maybe he really sees me for more than just like my prettiness or what I can give him. But yeah, I think there's something really powerful about being loved for, or maybe not for, but like with your fluids and your sicknesses and your failures and like the ugliness that we all have, right? Oh, and the pink wall as like, you know, that sweats and leeches suck something from, whatever. Like, the pink wall is such a moment of, you know, Thrushcross Grange keeping the outside stuff just barely on the outside, and this literal living wall kind of being gross, you know, like being disgusting and kind of being like, I'm not totally contained here, right? Oh, yeah, I think that's so cool.
Yeah, the wall, like, I think the wall is an example of one of those things that, like, absolutely causes us to question, like, the sanctity of the body. Like, if the wall is alive in the way that our flesh is alive, like, what is the difference? Like, what's happening there? Why, like, it's haunting in this way. What's behind it, you know? Is there blood behind it? They've got leeches on it.
Yeah, like, what are the leeches consuming?
Yeah.
Because they are stuck on there, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if we think too about like Kathy's first exposure to sexual pleasure is that scene with Zilla and Joseph, right? And we meet up with her later on the moors in private, trying to figure out how to masturbate. With, like, obviously Nellie never talked to her about this. You can tell. And Heathcliff finds her, sees her. She's so embarrassed. And he takes her fingers and puts them in his mouth. And that, like, it just feels like such, it's it's like sexy in a way that I was not prepared for when I was watching. I was like, oh no. Oh my goodness.
Right.
Oh my goodness. I like clutched my pearls.
Just the early Wuthering.
The early Wuthering, exactly. Like he's taken her hand, which has breached the barrier of her own body, and then he uses her hand to breach the barrier of his body in this way that's like so
Intimate.
and he like intimate and like looking her like perfectly in the eye while he's doing it. He didn't, and I'm so sorry. Am I allowed to swear? I forget. I can't believe that they didn't immediately consummate their love on the misty moors. But instead she runs away.
Yeah. I think that the concept of sort of abject and shame, and I think from the episode that I listened to, it was Julia Kristeva who came up with this originally, around
that's right.
specifically pregnancy and like the womb space and the body being inside of the body, and how that is so strange, and like the experience of being pregnant is so abject. Like, if you've ever been through it, you know, it's like there's a lot of fluids involved, and you know, giving birth is so wild in terms of those things. And I think you can also have that shame for yourself of just like, oh wow, like my body is being such a body in a way that I used to be able to control these things, you know?
Yeah.
But I also feel like there's like a rebellious aspect to like to goblin mode, specifically the way that you guys were talking about it, like being willing to be a little goblin, to refuse to make your hair look professional from a race perspective as well, right? It's this kind of like the correct contained clean bodies are white bodies, right? Like quote unquote. And so the idea of like, I'm not going to make myself look quote unquote professional today, especially from a racialized body perspective. There's something about that that's like empowering, right? It's like, I'm going to reclaim the truth that I am in a body, and stop trying so hard to look how everybody wants me to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think thinking about pregnancy in relation to Wuthering Heights is also like so relevant, because Kathy tells Nellie that the baby has died, that her fetus has died, and Nellie doesn't believe her. She thinks that Kathy's being dramatic. And so as a result, Kathy herself ends up dying of sepsis. And so we end up having this scene where she's bleeding out, and it's like the quantity of blood is so exaggerated, but at the same time, is from an abject perspective, like Kathy in this moment is like uncontainable. She in this moment has like Nellie has tried to contain her, Edgar has tried to contain her, Heathcliff has also in his own way tried to contain her by like making her be with him instead of like being with her husband, and they've all been unable to control her, and here she is, just like the vital essence of her blood is just seeping into the entire room, flooding the entire room. Yeah. Oh my God. There are a couple of scenes that sort of stand out in their like in the way that they were so wildly surreal. There was the scene when Kathy goes to visit her father, who is dying, and there's just these beautiful piles of empty gin bottles.
Like just, the way he's splayed out between these massive piles of bottles, and just what an image, right? Of like alcoholism, the weight of, like the sort of physical, literal weight of the abuse and the reasons why many people are alcoholics in the first place. And something about the bottles not being cleared out, like them being so visible. That scene really, I was like, wow, that's an incredible image just right there. Right.
And I feel like something about like the way that they were stacked as well, right? That there was like a kind of, they weren't cleared out, but somebody had to taking care of them
Right.
in order for them to be stacked in this way.
Which again maybe
feels...
speaks to the isolation, right? It's like they're
Yeah.
not having the recycling, truck come by once a week and clear out the bottles. Like, where else are they
That's
going to
right.
go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the bottles themselves become the furniture. The bottles become the walls. The bottles become
Yeah.
the windows.
And like the residue, I guess, aspect of it as well. Like, I feel like that's so much of what the movie spoke to for me was like the marks that are left by trauma, right? That like just the visibility of like it not being cleared out, it having nowhere to go, like it just staying and building. Like that did feel to me like a big part of what the movie spoke to. And now that I know more about the book, that's definitely part of what the book is speaking to as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. I also feel like the scene when Kathy puts her finger in the fish's mouth. That was
Same.
another one too. Was that the fish was encased in gelatin,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And you just see her, and the shot is incredible. It's just Kathy. It's a profile image of Kathy just putting her finger in the fish's mouth. What's compelling you to do this? It's when she's in Thrushcross Grange, because she is sexually frustrated because the sex that she has with her husband is perfunctory.
Right.
It's not exciting and pleasurable. So
it's more from that place of like her being kind of depressed or disconnected or kind of not getting pleasure from like all of the mountains of pleasure that are being offered to her, I guess, like
Yes.
of the wealth that she's being offered.
that's right.
I love that as well. It was so weird. Yeah, there were some moments with Isabella too, like the
Book of Vulvas.
the book of the book of friendship that is all like flower vulvas and mushroom penises, and it's just like this. And Isabella, she's so from what I understand, she's sort of infantilized in the book. Like, I read some stuff about how she's really treated as a child and she has very little agency in the book. And so how interesting to retell her story from this place where she's both innocent and sweet, but then there's also this real dark side to her in the movie that was, I guess, not in the book at all. But I thought that was so fascinating. And I loved I think something about, starting off with that first scene, with all of that discomfort and all of that kind of horror to it. I was sort of on edge through a lot of the rest of the movie, waiting for things to go really badly. And I think it definitely does have a horror vibe to it. But I started rewatching it because I couldn't stop talking about it with my husband. And I was like, okay, you got to see what I'm talking about. And as I'm watching it the second time, knowing what's happening, I'm actually finding it even funnier and lighter and like more enjoyable, because I think I was bracing for a lot of sexual violence. And actually it surprised me that there were these moments of really explicit consent. Yeah. And so in that first scene with Joseph and Zilla that Kathy is witnessing, they're doing this kind of like horseplay, I guess, literally. Yeah. And he's got some sort of contraption over Zilla's face, and she's like, pull it tighter. And he kind of gently says, like, it'll break your teeth. And she's like, tighter. And it's really a moment of like, these two absolutely trust each other and care about each other. And they're both like absolutely 100% fully wanting to be here. And then we hear sounds of like giggling, laughter, pleasure. Like, this was not a non-consensual situation at all. And I was so surprised by that. That's just not what I thought I was going to be watching right after that first scene. And then, of course, I was surprised that in that, with Isabella, Heathcliff kind of naming to her, here are my intentions. This is what I want. This is what I want to do for you. Do you want me to stop? He asked her that several times, and she keeps saying, no, I don't want you to stop. And so I loved the puppy play moment again, just to come back to that. Not knowing that in the book he kills her dog. Okay, this is like a layer that like I was not aware of. Okay.
I forgot that he kills her dog. Oh my god.
I feel like there's a darker layer that I was not like I wasn't thinking about. Obviously I didn't know. So that kind of darkens it a little bit for me. But in that scene where she writes this letter to Nellie and she's like, he's monstrous and I'm under his spell and I'm trying to escape and I can't get away. And then Heathcliff is like, you didn't make it sordid enough. She's like, I thought it was pretty sordid. Like,
yeah, exactly.
He's like, it's not getting Kathy's attention. And one of the things I think that is so like cool about adaptation is the way that you can retell something and consider, what if, again, Nellie is an unreliable narrator. What if Isabella was playing a part in this that had a little bit more agency? Or what if there was a part of her that enjoyed this experience, right? And again, I'll say I haven't read into that part at all yet. Like, I don't have a relationship with that piece, so I'm speaking from a place of like, I only have seen the film. But I do retellings, right? Like in my last several books, I've been retelling myths about, let's say, Medusa, right? What we know about Medusa is she's a monster. She's so ugly, she can kill men by looking at them or them looking at her. So I retell this story, there's lots to it, but as that she's actually a representation of the goddess that's been suppressed by patriarchy, by Christianity, by other things. And so Medusa is actually a representation of the shame that we feel around that sexual violence when we have to look at it. And that's why we turn to stone when we look at Medusa, because we're witnessing this shame that she's proudly representing and with power, right?
Yeah.
So that's a version of like, if I have more information of the story, or if I look at it from a different perspective or a different point of view, I can see the possibility for a whole other way of telling the story. And a lot of my goddess stories have been that way. And so I love that idea of retelling Isabella as a fully consenting partner in this, who is like enjoying this way of finding power for herself.
Yeah.
And playing with it for herself. And then I think, Heathcliff as well, who's certainly been seen as like an absolutely monstrous, horrible villain, to shift that villain edit, right? It's like, okay, what if that wasn't the case, right? Like, what if he actually was, and again, I know we're speaking from the 14-year-old fantasy of what this book might have been, which it wasn't, okay, to be fair. But I also love this idea of like, what if we see him as like messed up and abused, but loving, and always like everything that came for him, even in those moments when he was like, I will kill Edgar for you, like I'll go slit his throat, like that was in a moment of sexual passion, and you didn't know, like, did he really mean that, or was that just kind of like a moment where they're kind of playing with that sexually? Like that wasn't totally clear. But I did not read Heathcliff as an abuser in this film at all. I think that was a choice, right? That some people, again, are quite upset about. But I liked seeing people being consenting. I enjoy it. I'm a fan of seeing consent and not having to go through a whole bunch of sexual violence. There's no shortage of that, right?
Yeah, and I think too, I think we don't get a lot of representations of like BDSM consent or kink consent as well, right? And so taking a story and saying, well, how can I retell this so that the person who is infantilized in the story and also in the cultural narrative of the story is empowered in some way? Like, I find that such an important retelling. And for me, that feels very different than going back to Twilight, the scene after Bella and Edward have sex for the first time. The scene where Bella is just like, she's in the bathroom and she is, I'm talking about the movie, I haven't read the books. She's in the bathroom and she's like looking at herself in the mirror and her arms are just like covered in bruises. And it in no way has a kind of, it doesn't feel empowering. She doesn't seem empowered. She doesn't read as empowered or like sexually liberated in any way to me. And so like, yes, I understand that there are a lot of ways in which like pain and pleasure overlap, and that kink can involve bruising and cuts and bleeding and burning, all of these things. But with Isabella, oh no, I just realized that their names are similar. But with Isabella,
in quote unquote Wuthering Heights,
in quote unquote Wuthering Heights, we actually see her like come alive and be excited and like, even in that scene where she's writing the letter for Heathcliff, she is so much more powerful than he is in that moment. And that to me is such a fun and titillating representation of kink, as opposed to I had sex with my husband for the first time and now I'm covered in bruises.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I loved as well that, when she was collared as a puppy, Nellie walks in and she does not flinch.
Yeah.
She doesn't hide in shame. She's not the least bit embarrassed. She sticks out her tongue and starts panting.
That's
Like,
right.
with full eye contact with Nellie.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
Nellie is just like, I want no part of this. And Isabel's like, too bad you're experiencing it. And it was just so, like, fun. Like, how much fun she
Yeah.
was having with it. How delighted she was to be in that role. Like, it really felt that, it was that kind of, I don't know, just like the kind of Dom sub dynamic where we acknowledge that the sub is actually the one with power because the sub is the one that can say when that's enough or whatever it is, what they need. And the Dom is in many cases in service to the sub, right? And that was kind of what was happening. And I mean, what a weird way to interpret that, for sure. Like, I doubt that a lot of people reading Wuthering Heights were thinking of that. But why not retell it in your quote unquote adaptation, right? Like, I don't know. I thought that was exciting. Like, I thought that was really cool and fun and funny. I personally really liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously one problematic place with the adaptation, and I'm sure there were many, and like full space to people who really had problems with this film, but the casting of Jacob Elordi was criticized before the movie even came out, right? Like, people were upset because of the racial connotations and so on.
Yeah. So I guess I want to start by saying that I'm really surprised that none of the conversations I've seen about Jacob Elordi cast as Heathcliff have engaged with the fact that both Edgar and Nellie are cast as people of color. And so I'm really curious why it only matters that Heathcliff is not played by an actor of color. I think that the choices to cast both Edgar and Nellie with actors of color is really thoughtful. So initially, I thought of Edgar and Nellie as both being race-blind cast, but it was my co-host Hannah who was talking about how we can actually think about, like, okay, but Edgar is this like new money. Like clearly coming from the sort of unknown away into this tiny little isolated space. And so in a lot of ways, like, there's some, I think, really deep and interesting connotations with having Edgar played by a South Asian actor. And then having Nellie, who is similarly, like, where does she come from? Like, she's also herself isolated. And at one point, Kathy even makes a comment to her when she's a little girl, I think, about how she doesn't really belong there, And so choosing to cast Nellie with an Asian actor as well, I also think is really interesting and shows that, like, the director is thinking about the implications of what it means for these two characters to be visually racialized.
Right.
And so that's sort of my one poll of, like, I don't think Emerald Fennell was thoughtless. I think that she made these decisions, like, intentionally.
Right. So I have seen some criticisms that, like, if it is coming from a race blind perspective, like, let's just throw in some people of color wherever. I have seen criticisms that Nellie is the villain and Edgar is kind of a buffoon. And so there's like that from that perspective, if you read it that way, it's problematic that the actors of color were kind of pushed into these othered roles. Sure. And my feeling about that is that Nellie is an extremely central character, extremely complex. The villain, I think, in a lot of ways, but also sort of, I don't know if it's well-intentioned exactly. Like, you see her being quite petty at certain points, but I think a lot of it comes from, like, come on, girl, like, get your head out of the clouds. You're not marrying Heathcliff. Like, just live the wealthy life. I think there's also something interesting, and this is somewhat of a half-formed thought, but if it is intentional, right? Like, if it's like, I'm thinking clearly about this, I'm choosing to cast, Jacob Elordi as Heathcliff, and then I'm choosing these specific people to play these other roles. There is such a history, especially in the US and Canada of Asian people as the model minority, right? The idea of like, you're a minority, but you're not as threatening as like, say, a Black person or, you know, whatever it is. Like, you're allowed to be in these white spaces and have some privilege and power, but only if you follow the rules and only if you're quiet and only etc. So Nellie has so many moments of that. I think especially when they move to the Lintons. And she's like, what's wrong, Kathy? Like, is this place too warm, too comfortable? Like, is it too rich for you? Like, come on. Like, if you think of it from that perspective, if it is intentional and if Nellie, the character in the movie, was an Asian woman, you know, then she would kind of be speaking from like, don't threaten our position of power because we are just on the edge of losing everything. And I understand that as an Asian woman in a way that you, beautiful white woman, have never really had to think about. And I think Margot Robbie as Barbie exemplifies that, right? Like, I think Kathy does have this sort of general like entitlement, and she's like, oh, there's a little bit of blue in the sky, which means that, you know, the rain will pass and we won't be abused horribly by my father. Like, it's this optimistic white woman kind of like, everything's going to be okay because there's a tiny spot of blue over there. Whereas Heathcliff, from his perspective, which we'll talk more about, he knows how dangerous that is for him to be late in a way that Kathy kind of doesn't quite get. And so I feel like there is a way of looking at Nellie as like that she's aware of that danger. And so that's why she's doing a lot of the things that she's doing, is trying to protect the like modicum of power that she has in a society where, you know, named as an illegitimate child of like a lord, I guess, and someone else. And then maybe, you know, if we are actually reading her Asianness into the script or into the story itself, then that could be a piece of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I also really resist a reading of Edgar as a buffoon. I read him in this film as incredibly kind and incredibly patient and tolerant. He's Isabella's guardian. This character in the film very clearly wants to take care of people who need to be cared for. That's it. Like, he puts up with Isabella's very bizarre like, he puts up with so much.
She is very buffoonish. I think Isabella is very buffoonish.
Totally. But, you know, he's not a buffoon. He knows that Kathy and Heathcliff are having an affair. He's aware of that.
Right.
But, like, what is he going to do? Is he going to cast her out? He's not that kind of person. He is the same, like, he doesn't grow as a character particularly. He's not an especially, like, rich or dynamic character. But his role in this film is clearly, like, a devoted husband. Like, he made a choice. He was going to marry her and care for her. And he does, until, like, maybe he is in love with her. He obviously thinks that she's very beautiful. He painted her entire room to match her face.
Yeah. Cross Grange is buffoonish, but I agree. I find Edgar to be quite serious, actually.
Yes.
And, you know, there is that moment at the end where Kathy has died and he comes face to face with Heathcliff. And I felt there was such a moment of like, we have both lost someone who's really important to both of us. And like, I felt like there was just compassion between them in a way that there didn't have to be. Right.
Yeah.
And I see that as complex. I see that as loving.
Definitely.
I see that as serious, not buffoonish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Buffoonery around him, maybe, or like on the Linton side, but like not actually that character, and not the way that actor chose to play that character at all.
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So why do you think why Elordi? Why are we not having a Heathcliff of color? What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I can't speak to why Emerald Fennell made the decision she made about Jacob Elordi, but what I want to say is that I don't think that we need more men of color being cast in abusive roles towards women. So I think because we live in a fundamentally white supremacist society, I think that Jacob Elordi was able to play Heathcliff in a way that undermined the history of him as an abuser, the literary history of him as an abuser, so that Isabella could actually have power over him in
Ooh, yeah.
their relationship dynamic
Right.
in a way that I doubt would have been possible if he had been cast as an actor of color. So that's, I think, I think that that's important. I don't think we need more male actors of color being represented as abusers on screen. I think
Right.
that that's a trope that is extremely toxic and unhealthy. Yeah, so personally, like, oh no, is this canonically abusive man being played by a white man? Oh no, like, I don't care. That's fine. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, taking that risk of being Heathcliff, right? Like, I don't think he came off as an abuser in the film, but there was a lot of violent energy, aggression, toxicity. And as you're saying that, I feel like that would have been so much more risky for an actor of color to play, because there is room, I guess, for a white actor to be able to be maybe a bit more of a villain, maybe a bit more of a this or that, whereas the racist assumption would already be sitting there, right, for
Yes.
an actor of color. Well, as we're thinking about it now, yeah, I don't know, like, was it a missed opportunity, right? I mean, there are really wonderful actors of color who would have, you know, done this brilliantly. And I am curious if this is thoughtful, right, on Emerald Fennell's part, or is it just one of these things where, like she has said, you know, Jacob Elordi looks like the guy on the cover of the first version I read of Wuthering Heights. Like, it was just an association she had, and they worked together before on Saltburn, I guess. So
That's right.
like, for her, she only wanted him. Like, I think that was, it was already in her head that she was going to do that. So I don't know how much she thought about, like, should I, you know, consider getting an actor of color, like, what would that have meant? I think one of the best things about adaptation is you don't have to be too historically correct or, you know, follow things too closely. Like, I think Bridgerton is another interesting example of, like, you know, speculative fiction, world building, like, yeah, let's
right.
bring this in and let's change it up a little bit. I don't think you either have to follow, like, the book exactly. I don't think you have to follow the historicity exactly. And I think it is worth mentioning that in the book, we're talking about a time where race probably meant something different than what it does to us today, right? Like,
For sure.
you know, let's remember that whiteness is a concept that benefits whoever happens to be in power at the time. Like, a lot of cultures and races have been folded into whiteness when they play the power game, right?
Yeah.
As if you can choose. I mean, it's deeper than that, but it's at the time, you know, in this very isolated place. You know, that area, there was some interaction with slave trade and so on. Like, there would have been different people's backgrounds that they would have interacted with, but not a lot necessarily. And from what I understand, from what my mother-in-law was telling me, and also some of the research that I've been doing, the idea of race and class were really connected. There are really explicit moments of this person being named as different, but it's not clear from what I've read that anyone can really land on, like, he's clearly this ethnicity and it means this, right? Because again, we have those unreliable narrators. Maybe that was a bit of a way of expressing how isolated these people were, that they didn't know what they were talking about, you know, in terms of that. And, like, the language that Emily Bronte probably would have used would have been different had this person been Black, for example. Like, I think people agree that it's like he's unlikely to be Black. It's not impossible. But, you know, yeah, it was probably Romani or possibly South Asian or something like that. Or Irish, could have been Irish. Like, it's, and just somebody who was othered, you know, because he just was, like, lower class or whatever. Like, it's just not clear, right? Andrea Arnold in 2011 did an adaptation with a Black Heathcliff. I haven't seen it. I have heard that one is more oriented to Heathcliff's perspective, and so I'm kind of curious to watch that and see what is that like and how does that feel to have it from his perspective, especially of a person of color. You know, that's a different way of telling the story, right? So I feel like it's a valid criticism. It's something that we need to be thinking about and talking about. And like you say, let's be realistic that we are in a white supremacist culture, that maybe there was something important about having someone who is more white in Heathcliff's role, and then having the people of color be able to express these, I thought, pretty complex characters.
Yeah. I mean, I think too, you know, you said that Emerald Fennell wanted somebody who looked like the Heathcliff on the version of the book that she had as a teenager or whatever. So like we also have a tradition of like representing Heathcliff as white. So
Right.
like, and that is absolutely part of living in a white supremacist society, that like even when characters are explicitly named as like of color, in our text we cast them as white. Like
Right.
Jennifer Lawrence played Katniss Everdeen, you know. And then people absolutely lost their minds that both Rue and Cinna were played by black actors in the Hunger Games films, which like they are canonically of color in the text.
Well, isn't that funny how the criticisms have shifted, right?
Yeah. I mean, if we remember the way that people were so angry about a Black Little Mermaid, like I think
It wasn't that long ago. That's true.
Yeah, like I think people are always I think we live at a time right now where we are all so angry about so many things that it really doesn't take much.
Yeah.
But I think if you're angry that a character who you pictured as white is played by an actor of color, I think that might speak to some like attachments to seeing yourself represented that is maybe worth digging into a little bit. I understand that it's extremely charged and complicated. And I don't think that anybody who wanted to see Heathcliff as a romantic hero of color is wrong to want that. But I do wonder when people like want the abusive version of Heathcliff to be a person of color. Like that one feels a little bit like, why do you want that? Why is that important?
Yeah, and I know that this book is kind of understood as feminist to a degree. I don't imagine it can be anti-white supremacist, though, because of just the era that it was in, right? Like, if Heathcliff was of color and this, like, abusive monster, who is also compelling in the Byronic hero sort of way, like, is it possible that Emily Bronte was trying to say something positive about race? Or was like Heathcliff's monstrousness just folded into his race? Or vice versa, right? Like, was it just another way for him to feel othered? I mean, I feel like I've heard the story from this perspective of, like, we can see how he's abused because of his race, and that's what causes his abusive behavior down the line, which makes sense from our 2026 racial awareness. But is that to the book? Like, is that actually... Like, if we want to really go back and be literal about what was in there, what kind of trouble are we going to get in here?
I think so much of our classic works of literature in the Western literary canon that were written by white authors have these problems, right? So like Shylock in The Merchant of Venice has been played very heroically in contemporary adaptations, but he's still an anti-Semitic trope, you know? Like he's still like a vile, deceiving Jew with like just short of having claws and horns. And similarly, like Othello is a violent black man who murders his white wife.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like, we have these texts that I think have forgotten were also written in a deeply white supremacist culture. In fact, a culture so white supremacist, it engaged in colonization actively at the time. Do you know what I mean? And so like to think that those things aren't still present, I wonder, those morals and values probably haunt these texts in the same way that like our ancestors' trauma, you know, sits in us.
Unprocessed, right? I mean, I think this is a piece that has been coming up for me lately that I think is kind of interesting is like, there is a lot of racial awareness now in 2026 in the sense that people may be looking at a film like this and wondering why there's a white leading man, right? Which is fair. And also I feel like there's sort of a lack of white people looking into their own ancestry and looking into their own relationship with their own ethnicity or, you know, relationship with colonization and so on, because it is shameful. It's so like, it's a dark history and it's hard to look into. But I don't know that we're going to solve these problems without white people actually doing that work for themselves, right? As opposed to like, you know, putting it on people of color to like explain things to them, or appropriating, you know, cultural rituals or whatever from other places, which, you know, I have done as a, you know, a white person who has felt like a missing soul from a spiritual perspective, because, you know, growing up in Christianity, it's been like the religion of the colonizer and has so much violence and sexual violence and so on, power dynamics and things like that involved with it. So it's hard for me to feel like I can connect with that, you know, in that way. And so it's been interesting for me to look further back, like what about my people before, you know, patriarchy and colonization and all of those things, like how far back can I go? And that's what a lot of what I've been doing with these goddess books as well. So anyway, that's kind of a long way of saying, like, yes, we can criticize these movies, but just like at the very beginning, when the movie points at us and says, hey, it's you too, right? Like, could we also bring that with us a little bit and kind of be like, what is coming up for me that's uncomfortable here? Like, could I sit with that, as opposed to, you know, I don't know, just pass the movie off as bad, or, which, I mean, you're allowed to not like it. Like, let's be fair. Obviously, this is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, which is fine. And I'm not in any way saying that it was a perfect movie or that everyone should like it at all. Yeah. But I thought it brought up some really, really interesting things. And one of the things that was interesting to me is how angry people are about it, like how much they've hated it and the problems that have come up with it. I just think, like, obviously some tender point has been poked. Yes. So what is that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you so much, as always, for being here and sharing your thoughts. That was really awesome.
It was such a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking about this movie. I just love this movie.
I really loved it too. Yeah.
I really hope that anybody who's listening who like had a reaction to the movie where they just like knee-jerk didn't like it, I would love for them to give it a second chance and go into it with like, no, it's supposed to be ridiculous. Go into it from like, this is an over-the-top work of art.
And if you can separate out the expectations from the adaptation or other things, then, like, is there a different way of reading this? If you can set aside, maybe the discomfort of the object is again, one of the reasons people had such a visceral negative response to it, right? Like, if that could be interesting or queer, or like if there could be something kind of cool about that, does it feel different to watch it, right?
That's right.
Maybe not, and that's fine. But
that's okay.
we loved it as a house. Thanks, Marcelle. Bye.
Thank you so much.